So in our last class, we would have started 7.5, chapter 7.5, searching for record, and we would have looked at sorting our tables. We would have looked at the two options we have for filtering. We have auto filter, which is also called a simple filter, and we looked at our advanced filter. Remember the advanced filter? It has three parts. When it comes to filtering, there's basically two locations you can either filter in place, which means the table that you are filtering, the information gets filtered in the table. So the information that you don't want is hidden and the rest of the information is shown right where you have the original data, your table. Or you can filter to another location, and that is what we use advanced filter for. The advanced filter has three parts: the original data, which is going to be your table. It needs a criteria range, which is basically copying back your headings and putting your criteria below that. And then after you would have set up your advanced filter, go through the dialog box, you select where you're putting your output data, your filter data. So three parts. Today we're continuing with pivot tables, and then we're going to look at pivot charts. So to get us started, let's see, Robert, you can read for us.
Pivot tables. As your data increases, it can become more time consuming to update ranges of data, functions, and formulae. Depending on how you need to display your results, a pivot table makes it easy to summarize your data without altering the original location of it. Even if more data is added to the spreadsheet, the pivot table can be quickly updated. Pivot charts can also be created from a pivot. To create a pivot table from a set of data in a worksheet, you should check that your data is arranged as follows. You should have at least three columns of data. Each column of data should have its unique field heading. Your data should be organized tabular format, not have a blank row between the column heading and the first row of data. Check that the data also does not have blank rows or columns. Review the data to ensure that it has been entered accurately. Mixing up data causes incorrect. To create a pivot table,
Art,
take
you can pause there.
yeah.
So as mentioned, today we're looking at pivot table. Now, the purpose of a pivot table is to summarize your data that you already have. So say for example, this table, say for example, this table here with the original data. Instead of you cutting information and pasting it somewhere, or copying information and pasting it in another location to create a table, you can use the option of creating a pivot table. And what the pivot table does, it would take all of these information that you have in this table here and summarize it based on how you want it to be. So you can actually rearrange the columns, rearrange the data to however you want it to be. That is up to you with your pivot table. Now, so remember that fact about a pivot table. It is used to summarize your data without altering the location of your original data. So it's used to summarize data. Now, from the pivot table, we can create pivot charts. And to create a pivot table, there's a few rules that we need to follow. First, we need at least 3 columns of data. Remember the columns, they go vertical. So like in this table over here, there's 3 columns of data. There's student ID, subject, and grade. Each column of data should have its unique field heading, meaning that the table, it should have headings. So student ID, subject, and grade. Your data should be organized in a tabular format. What that means is that the headings should basically be mainly at the top here, with the data going downwards. Now, if you have a blank row between the column heading and the first row of data, it can cause errors. So ensure that there is no blank row, that all are filled with information or data. Check that there is no blank rows and columns, and review the data to ensure that it is accurate. Because remember, whatever data is inside of the table, that is what will show up in your pivot table. So if it is wrong in your main table, then it will be wrong in your pivot table also. So let's look at creating a pivot table. And we'll have Mahima. Can you read for us?
To create a pivot table, click on any cell in your set of data. Click the Insert tab and then select the Pivot Table option, figure 7.46. The dialog box is displayed with your range of data selected. You can choose to place a pivot table on the new sheet or display it on the same sheet. Your pivot table is created by moving fields of data using drag and drop options. This creates a view of the original data but in a different format.
Okay, so before we get on to the other parts, like any other table or chart, we usually go to the Insert tab, and this is where we insert charts, we insert tables, and so on. And all the way to the left here is where you're going to find the pivot table option to insert a pivot table. Now, this dialog box here is what will appear, and you basically put in the necessary information to create your pivot table. So let me see if we can find a table with data. So I have this spreadsheet here, and these are supposed to be my headings. Let me take off this margin center. Let me delete this here. Shift up. Right. So this is the table that I'll be using, and to create your pivot table, like any other feature in spreadsheet, if you click inside of the if you click inside of the table, then spreadsheet will automatically detect that information. Now, so when we go to click on insert and insert pivot table, notice the marching ants is going around the table area again because it automatically detected that these are the headings, so anything below would be considered data. If I had clicked outside, insert pivot table, notice the table wasn't highlighted, and in that case you would have had to, this option is selected by default, select a table or range, and we would have to click on the arrow to highlight our table now, or basically the data that we want in the pivot table. So it's much easier to just, you can even highlight the data if you want also before and insert pivot table, that can work. But a much faster way is to select one cell inside of it and select whichever option you want. Insert pivot table. Now there's only basically two options that we'll be using. So there's a lot of options here, but basically only two we'll be using. You're gonna select your table or your data, and then you're just gonna select your location. That's the only two options you're gonna input. Do you want it on the same sheet that we're working on? Then we click on existing worksheet, and then we select the location. Or do we want it on a new sheet? So if we select existing sheet, I'm going to select here and click OK, and that's it. So this box here, the field table, the pivot table fields, Alright, before we get into that part of the dialog box, it's best we read the one-dimensional and the two-dimensional so that you get a more understanding on that. So, well, as I mentioned, when we're creating our pivot table, you will get this dialog box here, and we're only putting in two options inside of it. We're selecting our data and we're selecting the location. Now, when it comes to pivot table, there are two types of pivot table that we can create. There is a one-dimensional pivot table and there is a two-dimensional pivot table. So let's look at the difference. Madison, can you read for us? One-dimensional pivot table.
By default, Excel summarizes your data by either summing or counting the items. If so, numeric values. Are usually dragged to the values area. If you also drag a field to either the rows area or the column area, you can create a one-dimensional pivot table. Suppose you wish to find out how many students in each subject received results. Figure 7.48 shows the subject field in the row area while the grade field is in the values area. The pivot table shows on the left as you drag the fields to their areas. This new pivot table is located in a new sheet while the original data remains in its sheet.
Alright, so Right, so as I mentioned, the pivot table is used to summarize your data. So Excel can summarize your data by either summing or counting. Now, if you look on the right hand side here, the field table, the pivot table fields, this box here is where you create your pivot table. So let me show you my example. This area at the top here is where you'll have all of the headings for your table. So notice I have students, stream, IT, and EDPM. Those are the headings inside of this table here. They appeared in this section here. So all of the headings will appear. Now at the bottom, you will notice 4 boxes. And these boxes are what you use to create your pivot table. Now, as the note mentions, you drag to the values area. So basically, you are dragging these headings here to whatever area in this box you want it to be. So for example, I can drag students to the columns, and notice the students appeared in each column. I can drag the student over into the row, and notice the students appeared in the rows. Now, something to note is that numeric values are usually dragged to the values area. So notice at the bottom here in this box, there's a values box. So anything that you have with numeric value, you would put inside of this values area. And basically, headings that have normal kind of data, like for example, the student name, the stream that the students are in, you usually put that in the rows or the columns. So in this case, if I had dragged stream into values, notice it counted the stream. Notice the name of the stream didn't show up. Each of the students are in the art stream. But instead of art showing up here, it showed up 1 because it counted the arts. So whatever is placed in the values, that is what will get summarized. That is what will get counted or added, depending on which option you use. So that is why numeric values are mostly used inside of the values area. But if you want to, for example, maybe you might have wanted to count the streams, so you can do that here also. Now if you had put stream in the row, notice it would show it below the student name. So creating a pivot table is as simply as dragging and dropping the information. So you just have to drag the relative information into whichever box you want it to create a pivot table, and that is it. So notice by doing the opposite, by having the stream inside of the rows, look at the bottom here, by having stream inside of the rows, only the art stream showed up. And by counting the students, it summarized that 13 students are inside of the arts stream. So that's the power of a pivot table. You can rearrange information to get it different from different perspective without basically making any change to your original data. Now, As was mentioned, we're looking at one-dimensional pivot table. Now, a one-dimensional pivot table only has information, only has a field inside of the row or the column. So, in this case here, I could have put student inside of the columns and stream inside of the rows, but that is not a one-dimensional pivot table. A one-dimensional pivot table is only having field either in the column or the row, not at the same time. It could only be in either the column or the row. So student being inside of the column by itself with nothing inside of the row, that is a one-dimensional pivot table. If I drag the student over into row, I leave the column empty, and I have the student in row, that is a one-dimensional pivot table. If I put the stream inside of a column, that is no longer a one-dimensional pivot table. That is called a two-dimensional pivot table. So let's look at that one now. Hitesh, you could read for us?
You can hear me clearly?
Yes.
Alright, a two-dimensional pivot table. A one-dimensional pivot table shows a column or a row of data. If you drag a field to the rows area and drag another field to the columns area, then a two-dimensional pivot table is created. Make sure to drag another field to the values area to complete the pivot table.
Good. So it's that simple. Creating a pivot table, if you want to delete the information, you can just simply drag back the field into where all the fields are located. Or you could have removed the checkbox here from the field. So as was mentioned, putting a field inside of the row and a field inside of the column, that is creating a two-dimensional table. But remember, you need to put some sort of information, some sort of field inside of the values to get a summarized information, summarized data. Now, and by having only one inside of either row or column, you have a one-dimensional table. Good. Before we move on to the charts now, any question on creating the pivot table or the difference between one-dimensional and two-dimensional table? Yes or no, so that we can move on quickly?
No, sir.
Celicia?
I like it, sir.
Alright, so as I mentioned, creating a pivot table is as simple as dragging and dropping. So you just have to know where you are putting the field in either the column or the row. You just have to move it around until you get a design that is recommended or that looks presentable. So the next topic is frequency distribution. And Khadijah, you could read for us.
Sometimes you may want to count the number of times a value occurs in a set of data or how many times a specific payment was made between two dates. Creating a frequency distribution provides this information quickly for you. For example, suppose you have a list of students with their ages and you wish to find out how many students grouped in 2-year intervals registered for exams. Figure 7.50 shows the initial pivot table that is created after you drag the age field to both the rows area and the values area. Grouping the ages in intervals of 2 produces the frequency distribution for those in the two age ranges who registered for the subjects.
Good. So we have the same pivot table fields dialog box on the right hand side here, but we have this groupings dialog box. So more tables. I'm wondering if I'll get it with this one here. It's not indicating where the grouping options are. Filter options to the filter values. Where are the grouping options? Or is it because I don't have any numbers? Give me a second, let me check something. Right click on the values at group. So right click. Where is the grouping options? Right click the values at group. Where is the grouping options? Give me a second. I'm trying to locate the grouping options because I'm not seeing it. Right. Um, that is because I think it's because these are not actual values. So let me just create another table. Um, Students grades. Um, what is the new thing? I don't put days. Good. And grades. We're gonna have three, six. All right. So this is my new table. Insert pivot table. I want it on the existing sheet. I'm going to select the location of cell D, arrow, OK, and pivot table. So I want students. I'm going to put it in the rows, and I'm going to put grades inside the values. And we have the grouping options here. So notice when I put the grades inside of the values, it's not giving me that grouping option because it seems as though it's only allowing you to group what is inside of the rows and the column. Because notice the option is here now. So whatever data you put inside of the rows and the column, that is where when you get the group option. So I think this automatically cannot group that section. So let me try putting the grades. Alright, let me put the grades inside the column so you can see that better. And group, right? Because we can. The grouping options are mainly for numbers. So here we can group our numbers. So numbers starting with 21 and numbers that are ending with 23. We can group that, and we have our grouping options here. And this here would mean anything above the 23. So what is the purpose of our frequency distribution? It says, for example, suppose you have a list of students with their ages and you wish to find out how many students grouped in 2-year intervals registered for an exam. So if you want to group certain information together to present that information, for example, like how I grouped the grades together to know how many students got that specific grade, then the grouping option will allow you to do that. So for example, let me try 21, 21, 22, 2, 24, 24, 25, 25, 25. Good. So notice when I change the data in the table, it didn't change inside the pivot table also. So I'm going to need to, let me see if I undo, if that will update it. No, it didn't update it. So let me remove my pivot table. and recreate another one with the new data that I have there. Insert pivot table, select my table again, existing location, I want it on the same sheet here. Okay, and I'm gonna put this grades into the rows, right, and the students into the values. So notice it's summarizing. 2 students got the grades of 21, 2 got 22, 2 got 24, 3 got 25. So what if I want to group it now? Group it into twos. How many students got 21 and 22? So in that case, I can right click, use the grouping option, group by 2. Let me see if that's gonna work. Right. So it grouped by 2, 21 and 22 were grouped together, and 4 students got those grades. 23 to 22 were grouped together, 23 to 25, and 5 students got those grades. So that is the grouping option, the frequency distribution. Okay, so we're gonna finish off with pivot charts. Sion, can you read for us?
Pivot charts. Now that you can summarize your data into a pivot table, a pivot chart can help you to visualize your results. To create a pivot chart, first select any cell within your pivot table. Then in the pivot table tools section, locate the Analyze option and select Pivot Chart. You can now select a suitable chart type and click OK. Your new pivot chart will be placed on the same sheet as the pivot table.
Good. So let's look at that. We have our pivot table here now. So remember, this table over here is our original table, and then we created a pivot table over here. You can tell the difference because this box will appear. Now something you should note is that, for example, if this box doesn't appear, because remember we need that box to change our pivot table. So notice when we click on our pivot table, this pivot table tools area appears at the top here, these options. If you click anywhere else, it's no longer there. So these options here, these new tabs that appear, they usually appear for specific options that you would use. Like if you've created a table, a chart, or something, these new options would appear for that specific feature. So if you're no longer seeing your pivot table fields box, you go to the Analyze tab. After you would have clicked inside of your pivot table, go to the Analyze tab and you click on Field List, and the box will appear so that you can make your necessary changes on your pivot table. Now let me undo this grouping. Good. So we're looking at creating our pivot chart. Now to create our pivot chart, we go to the Insert tab, and to the right here in the charts area we have pivot chart. So we select the pivot chart, the one at the top or the one at the bottom here, doesn't matter, and we select the type of chart that we want. Do we want a line chart, column, pie, whichever one we want? We can choose a line, click OK, and our line graph was created. And then we can move it to wherever we want it. We can keep it on the same sheet, or we can move to another sheet. not allowing you. Cut, paste, and it's now on another sheet. But we can look at it from the same sheet. And it's that simple of creating a pivot chart. So later on, I think we haven't looked at creating normal charts as yet, but creating a normal chart is just as simple. You have the insert tab, but to create a normal chart, you would have had to select your data. When we get to that, we'll see how different it is from creating a normal chart. So these options here are for creating normal charts, but a pivot chart is this option over here. And when we get to creating a normal chart, I'll show you the difference because you might not understand it right now. But just note that to create our pivot chart, you can basically select anywhere inside of your table. It's gonna detect the data automatically. You select the pivot chart option, whichever option you want, whichever kind of chart or graph. Okay, and notice the data automatically appeared. One thing to note with your pivot chart, okay, I think that falls under modifying your pivot table. So let's read that before we get into that. Jomani, can you read for us?
Yes, sir. Modifying pivot tables. As you added delete columns or rows in the original set of data, these changes are not automatically updated by the pivot table. To update the pivot table, right-click anywhere in the pivot table and select Refresh. Sometimes you may not want to view all the results in your pivot table. Filtering dates can be done by clicking on the arrow next to the row or column labels. This shows the list of options to select those you want. You will include or leave out. In Figure 7.4, you want to view only grades 1 to 3.
Last two paragraphs.
Pivot tables summarize your data by either summing or counting the items. You can, however, change the type of calculation, such as average, maximum, or minimum. Right-click on the cell with aggregate function, sum of age bracket sum of age in this example. Then select value field setting in Figure 7.55, and select the new aggregate function bracket count in this example, and click OK. To delete a pivot table, select the entire range of data that makes up the pivot table, then press delete. It will not alter the original data or pivot tables or charts. You may want to delete the sheet with the pivot table if that is easier.
Good. So to modify our pivot table, so as I would have showed you, when you make changes to your original data, it does not change inside of your pivot table at the same time. So if I change that to 20 and 20, it doesn't change. So they're saying that you right click on your table and there's the refresh option, and notice 20 now appeared and there's no longer 21. So if I change back 20 to 21 over here on the left, I go back to my pivot table, I right click, refresh, and the new information was updated. So that's how you update your pivot table. Now, just like your simple filter that I would have showed you a few weeks ago, your simple filter has a similar arrow like this here, and you can basically do the same thing with this arrow to filter out information. So you can sort here, largest to smallest. You can take out some of the dates if you want, some of the grades. So you can filter it based on what you prefer. Now, in the values area, this is where the data is summarized. And by default, spreadsheet or Excel would pick one of the summarizing options: count, average, sum, and so on. Now, if you want it to be something else, you click on the field that is inside of the values area and you select value field setting. And here now, you'll get this box where you can select which one of the summarizing options you want. Do you want it to sum, count, average, max? So in this case, we're going to sum. Okay. And it doesn't have any option because there's nothing to add. So that's why it remained as 0. So that's why it would have selected the count option, because most of the time it would select the option that is most suitable. So, but to change the summary option, you click on the arrow, value field settings, and you select the summary option that you want. Now it mentions to delete your pivot table, you simply highlight. Like if you're highlighting cells, highlight, and you press the delete option. Notice the chart is still here. It only deleted the table. If your delete key on your keyboard is not working, on the home tab, you have the delete option here also. Now, to get into what I was going to show you, let me change back the summary option to count. So I don't know if anyone was noticing, but every time I change the pivot table, the chart automatically change. And that is a difference between a normal chart and actually it's the same. So as you change data in this table here, it would reflect inside of your chart. So I can actually change the data here. So if I change 1, 2, 3, notice 1, 2, 3 appeared at the bottom here. If I change this 2 to 1, 2, 3 also, okay, it's not going to allow me to do that. So that means because that's counting there. So what else can I change? In this case, it's only going to allow me to change the headings. So as you make changes to your pivot table, it will change inside of your pivot chart also. These questions here, you'll be doing it for homework. I'll put out an assignment on Google Classroom for you to upload a picture of your homework once again. Let's see, next class is Friday, so complete that by Friday. Friday we'll look at it and practice these exercises here. Another random group will be presenting exercise 8, 9, and 10. We can do that on Friday. Yes, we'll do that on Friday. So on Friday, we'll be looking at these questions for your homework, so ensure you complete it by Friday. And practice these exercises. Exercise 8, 9, and 10. Exercise 8 is in chapter 7.4. And practice these 2 more. And on Friday, a random group will be presenting that exercise. So, before we conclude, is there any questions on the pivot table? Anything you guys don't understand about it before come Friday and you say you don't know how to create your pivot table? Okay, seems you guys understand. It's actually not difficult. As I mentioned, the pivot table is used to summarize your data. In your pivot table, when creating, you get this dialog box here. You have two options. You select the table range, basically what data you are using, and the next option is where do you want your pivot table. Do you want it on another sheet? Do you want it on the same sheet? Then after that, you will get this here. You will get an area where your pivot table will be displayed, and you will get the pivot table fields box. And with the pivot table fields box, you simply drag and drop to whichever area you want it. If you want the fields inside of your column, you drag it there. If you want it in the rows, you drag it there. Remember, we use basically values inside of the values area. And because that is what will get summarized, either counted, summed, max, min, whichever option you may select. So quick question, Jasmine, what is the difference between a one-dimensional and a two-dimensional pivot table? Jasmine? What is the difference between a one-dimensional and a two-dimensional table?
Well, one-dimensional uses only one thing, like the column, and two-dimensional uses the column and the row.
Very good. So in this image here, just having the subjects inside of the row and nothing inside of the column, that is a one-dimensional pivot table. If the subject was inside of the column and the row was empty, that is also a one-dimensional pivot table. And by having fields inside of both of the column and the row at the same time, that is a two-dimensional pivot table. We also looked at frequency distribution. If we wanted to look at the frequency of some sort of information, we can group those information together using the grouping options. And then lastly, we looked at creating our pivot chart. It's as simple as selecting our pivot table, going to the Insert tab, and inserting a pivot chart. And the information from that table will be reflected inside of our chart. Right, so don't forget to do your homework and practice your exercise for Friday. If you guys don't have any questions, you are free to leave. That's the end of today's class.